These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett and welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. We've got a wide range of topics for you to cover on this week's broadcast. Biostimulants have been catching some attention in soybean production, but are they really paying off? Steve White will join us in a few moments to take a closer look. Need to renew your chemigation or pesticide certification? Well, Nebraska Extension has a full slate of opportunities coming up. Later on in the broadcast, Darin Newsom will join us to break down his favorite topic, all those USDA reports that came out earlier this week. And as always, weatherman Eric Hunt, he's standing by with your weekly weather forecast. All that and more is coming up on Market Journal, but let's get things started right here. Grain bin safety remains a top concern for ag producers, and one company here in the Cornhusker State continues to tackle that on. It's called Grain Weevil. Now, we've featured their innovative approach before, and they've got a new product line that we want to talk about today. This week we check in with their team to see what new tools they're bringing to the table for producers in 2026.
Well, do it, or that might be the easiest. Go to the ground. And you don't have to set that. Yeah, so we started Grain Weevil back in 2020 based on a challenge from a good friend of ours, farmer, who said, hey, you build robots, you should build me a robot to keep me and my kids out of the grain bin. And so that kind of started our learning process for why the job inside of a grain bin is dangerous. And that's why we designed the Grain Weevil robot, is to go inside the grain bin, do the hard work that no human should, and keep farmers and workers safe and out of those nasty, dangerous facilities. So like I said, we started as a startup here in Nebraska in 2020, and we've been through startup programs here in the state and funded through some of that as well. And this is actually our first, 2025 is our first full year of production. We've been slowly building up our manufacturing in Omaha, Nebraska, with our small team of 10. And so right now we build robots and sell those, as well as doing services through our Bin Assist network. So everyone thinks the idea is amazing. The mission is something easy to get behind, safety inside of the grain bins. Everyone has a story. They know someone or they've heard of someone in their local area that's been affected by an accident in the grain bins. So it's a very real issue. I think the reaction after that is, what's the price? What's it going to cost me to get in working with one of these? And how does it work with my unique bin setup, my unique farm? And so we've been really working hard to better explain and better market the robot for those scenarios, because we think we can have a big impact not only on safety, but on the quality of your grain, the window of operation that you have. You can harvest earlier, you can store longer, take better care of your grain, because it is a bank account in your backyard that you should be watching over and taking care of. This year at the show, we're showing off our full production model, and that includes the whole package. So that's the robot system, the winching, the charging system, and the camera system that you need to get going on your farm. And all of those components have been upgraded year over year as we prepare for production. So this model now is IP dust and waterproof, so you can wash it off. It won't get full of dust from being inside of a nasty grain bin. Easy to clean off. Better accessories, easier to use. And so all across the board, we've been focused on longevity of the robot, how tough it is, easily replaceable parts like the augers, and then the extra systems around it that are required to make it run smoothly. So we have a really great relationship with our bin assist partners, and they, up until this point, have been doing services with a small fleet of robots. And that's been for our benefit, for testing and getting more and more use out in the world in really unique situations. And so we've had great feedback from that, as well from the farmer side, where they've helped some really serious situations where bins have been real nasty and they were able to help with that, all the way down to I just want to see it run on my farm. I want to see what it looks like, how it operates, and it's a really wonderful demo to get a service out at your farm before you're ready to purchase. And it's great because they'll also be the ones that will help you through the purchasing process, decide what you need for your farm specifically to have a best setup, and then they'll be there to train and install, do things like the winch install, which is a bit of a pain. But once it's set up, you should be ready to go. So you can either reach out directly to our bin assist partner based on your area. All that information is on our website. To plug in your address, find your nearest bin assist partner, and reach out to them, and they know what to say. They'll help you out and help you figure out what you need.
Of course, grain bin accidents continue to claim dozens of lives each year across rural America. Many of those accidents are preventable. That's why technology like Grain Weevil matters. It's not just about efficiency, it's frankly about safety. If you'd like to learn more about their latest innovations, you can visit them online at the website grainweevil.com. Nebraska Extension has dozens of in-person chemigation training sessions scheduled across the state in early 2026, giving producers plenty of opportunities to get certified ahead of the upcoming growing season. Chemigation training sessions for 2026 will kick off January 27th in Ogallala at the Keith County Fairgrounds and wrap up on April 15th in O'Neill at the Holt County Courthouse. Each session includes the opportunity to take chemigation certification exams, which are required to earn or renew your certification. Online training is also available, and that went live back on January 1st. The digital version walks you through a series of modules that must be completed before you can unlock the online certification exam. Now, there is no charge for training or the certification card itself. However, you still will need to obtain a chemical injection site permit through your local NRD, and that does come with a fee. Once you've passed the exam, your results are sent to the Nebraska Department of Water, Energy, and Environment, which will then mail out your 4-year certification card. Pesticide applicator training will also begin, coming up January 27th in Ogallala and continues all the way through May 14th, with the final session held in Holdridge at the Phelps County Extension office. Nebraskans seeking to earn or renew their private, commercial, or non-commercial pesticide license will have a multitude of options to choose from, whether you prefer in-person training or online learning at your own pace. In Nebraska, a pesticide license is required if you apply restricted-use pesticides, apply any pesticides commercially, for example, lawn care or structural pest control, or conduct outdoor vector control work on behalf of a state or local agency. Private applicators, those using pesticides on their own or rented farmland, can certify or recertify by attending a local face-to-face training session, participate in a crop production clinic, complete an online self-study course, or pass the written exam. Commercial applicators need a license to apply restricted-use pesticides for hire or to apply any pesticides professionally on landscaping or structural pest control situations. For first-time commercial or non-commercial applicators, 2 exams are required, a general knowledge test and a category-specific exam that matches your area of work. Exams are available statewide. For recertification, commercial and non-commercial applicators, you've got several options. Those include attending an in-person training session, completing the online training program, attending a conference that offers recertification credit, or simply retaking and passing the exam. Now, if you're looking to get certified during these winter months, I encourage you to visit the website pested.unl.edu to find some of those training dates in your location. Up next, our chance to talk about the grain markets. And joining the broadcast is the man in the know, Darin Newsom, senior Barchart analyst. And Darin, a lot of farmers caught off guard with the USDA numbers that came out earlier this week. So we brought you on, of course, a man who loves following those numbers. Tell us exactly what USDA said. I sarcastically say that, of course, as you and I have fun conversations about that USDA data. But let's start right here. In particular, when it comes to corn, USDA's January report certainly caught the corn market by surprise. What's your interpretation of that data that came out, and why did it catch so many people off guard?
Because the reality is the numbers were probably too big. When you increase planted acres, harvested acres, yield, production, total supplies, all of these things, and it winds up pushing ending stocks, the projected ending stocks up to 2.2 billion bushels. That was a big change, and it's probably based on what we've been hearing across the country, probably a little bit overestimated. But here's the reality: is that if we watch the real fundamentals of the market, and that is starting with the cash indexes, national average cash price, or the intrinsic value, whatever you want to call it, and we apply simple law of supply and demand, the fact that the index has been as low as it has, running below its previous 5-year low monthly closes. So we knew that overall supplies were large. We know that we had a big harvest. We've also had strong demand, so because the market just absolutely didn't crash. We didn't see new 10, 15-year lows. We didn't see future spreads go to 70, 80% full commercial carry. We didn't see basis just collapse. So we know there's been strong demand, that through the first quarter of the marketing year, enough to offset some of the increase in supplies. But bottom line, these reports, they aren't about transparency. They are about generating trade, and that's exactly what happened. It triggered the algorithms. We saw a huge amount of volume on report day, as is usual for the January report. And now we've reset the markets, and we have to start over from these new levels.
Let's go from corn to soybeans now. Didn't see much support, of course, in those reports, but I'm curious your take on the longer term of the soybean market. Are we kind of seeing this oversupply mindset continue?
Yes, we are. And, again, it wasn't any huge surprise. What probably stands out to me is I think what the USDA is still at 1.57 billion bushels on exports. And if we look at the weekly export sales and shipments and we apply some simple mathematics to it, the pace projection of those shipments is projecting total marketing year exports of 1.1 billion bushels. So there's 475 million bushels that could possibly come back into the market. Now, with everything that's going on between the U.S. administration, China, on the global stage and everything else, it's interesting to note that the U.S. is not shipping that many bushels per week to China. That most of the sales that we're making, and we have seen some increased sales due to the lower price, but those sales are adding up into an unshipped book. And the vulnerability on the U.S. side is as we get closer to Brazil's harvest, some of those could start to get canceled as retribution for what's going on around the world.
Something we'll keep a close eye on. Back to corn, you kind of alluded to this, but even with the futures under pressure, we see national corn basis firmed a little bit slightly. What's that tell you about the cash market behavior? And really that end user demand, as you point out, still remains strong.
Yeah, the demand is strong, but most of it's coming from the export side. Ethanol demand remains a question mark. We know that the U.S. administration is not renewable fuel friendly. So that's a problem. We also know by looking at spreads, by looking at the cash markets in the cattle as well, that we are not rebuilding the herd right now. So feed demand and ethanol demand both have question marks attached to them. So it's going to have to be the U.S. stays as strong as it is in exports, and I just don't know that that's going to be possible because again, Brazil is going to be bringing its next crop on. The U.S. is still going to have solid export demand, but I'm thinking that we're going to start to slow this thing down a little bit. And if so, then that could start to weaken basis, again, based on the sheer number of bushels, sheer number of supplies the U.S. has on hand.
Let's jump over to the wheat market. Of course, prices continue to be historically weak. Visited with a wheat producer in southwest Nebraska. He pointed out, this weather we've seen, and up until the last couple of days, completely unseasonable. And he's concerned about possible winter kill. We hear a lot of that during February. But what's your outlook on wheat here the next couple of months? Is there any sort of optimism to see a bounce in prices on the board?
Yeah, it is. And usually I scoff at the topic of winter kill. But I've talked to some folks as well from Kansas, Nebraska, and so on. And, there just hasn't been that much winter this year. So, one gentleman from Southwest Kansas told me that the crop has continued to grow. It never actually went into full dormancy. So I think it does increase the vulnerability at least a little bit for for a potential problem if we see an early spring freeze. But really from here on out, and you mentioned it, right off the bat, the cash markets are so weak. So we know, the U.S. isn't going to run out of supplies of wheat anytime soon. Demand, is so. So the real issue here is if the market's going to go higher, it's going to have to come from the fund side. And that would mean, covering short positions right now in soft red winter and hard red spring and seeing if they're willing to add to what was recently switched over in the hard red winter market.
My thanks again to Darin for sharing his time and insight with us on the broadcast. Want to let you know that next week we'll be joined on the show by Kyle Bumstead for a look at what's happening in both the grain and livestock markets. Now, heads up to you if you're looking for hourly updates on grain and livestock trades throughout the week. I encourage you to tune in to your local rural radio network station all across Nebraska. Well, whatever crop farmers plant, reaching a profitable yield takes planning and smart decisions. Nathan Mueller, Executive Director of New Horizon Genetics, says new wheat growers need to pay particular attention to management practices and avoid some common mistakes that can hurt the overall bottom line. You can read more about the 5 big pitfalls to avoid when growing wheat in the January issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Up next, time to check in on weather with Nebraska Extension's Eric Hunt. Eric, about midweek, much of the state saw a switch, and now we've got this winter weather here. Imagine it's here to stay. What can you tell us about what's coming up over the next 7 to 10 days?
Well, thanks, Bryce. Definitely got some more winter weather coming up here the next week to 2 weeks. Matter of fact, we may be seeing some of the coldest temperatures we've seen so far this season by the end of this next week. More on that here in a little bit. Sunday afternoon, looking another cold front coming through the state. So by late Sunday evening, we're going to see chances for snow showers across pretty much all of north central and eastern Nebraska. Now, again, I don't think we're looking at any significant accumulations, but certainly could have a ½ inch, an inch in some spots. And with gusty winds out of the north and northwest, that would certainly reduce visibilities, particularly on east-west roads across the good portion of the state. Going to be pretty cold across most of the state on Monday, particularly the eastern half of the state, where I think we're going to see highs mostly in the 20s. Lows on Monday morning may get down to the upper single digits to low teens. Good news is we should see at least a couple of days of somewhat milder temperatures across most of the state, if not the entire state. So I think there's a reasonably good chance most of us will at least get into the 40s on Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. There may be another cold front that sneaks through sometime Wednesday, early Thursday. But by and large, the midweek looks relatively tranquil in terms of lack of precipitation, and I think also some milder temperatures. But by the time we hit the later portions next week, things are going to change, and change in a fairly big way, and probably in a maybe impactful way for a lot of us here across this portion of the country. So we're going to see some polar vortex stretching coming back into this portion of the country. It's going to really help squeeze some of this really cold air coming into the western United States. We may also see a surface low pressure develop somewhere in the southern high plains and move toward the northeast. So that may bring a possibility for at least a good portion of the state, or maybe the entire state, to see winter storm type conditions as we head toward the end of this next week. Also going to be a possibility of seeing some ice maybe across extreme southeastern Nebraska and the Highway 70 corridor. Now, again, this is a little ways out. I'm doing this on Wednesday, so it's possible that this may look quite a bit different as we head into early this next week. Regardless, I just pay close attention to the forecast as we move through next week, as this may be a relatively impactful winter storm coming through this portion of the country by the end of this next week. Certainly, I think we're looking at much colder temperatures coming back into this region of the country by the time we head toward the end of this next weekend. Likely looking at the coldest temperatures we've seen so far this year for pretty much all of us, if not certainly most of us, if not all of us, by the end of this next week. CPC does show above average being favored for the entire state and most of the country, actually. So again, I think there's going to be chances that we get some snow here by this next week. CPC also shows colder than average favored for the entire state. Again, I think this is something I would really bank on. That may not be bitterly cold every single day in this stretch, but certainly the majority of this time is going to be colder than average, which is certainly an anomaly compared to what we've had so far this winter, particularly in the western half of the state. European model also shows colder than average favored here across the entire north central part of the country. And the CPC does show hazardous temperatures, at least a slight risk of hazardous cold across the entire northern portion of the country as we head into the period of January 24th to 27th. Again, I think there's going to be a chance that that hazardous cold does make a visit to a good portion or maybe all of the state, at least for periods of time between January 24th and January 30th. I know we're looking at any really prolonged sub-zero stretches, but we may certainly have at least a 24-hour stretch where it is very, very cold. And we may have multiple of those types of stretches coming in here the next couple of weeks by the time we start getting into late next week. So I know we've been very, very warm across a lot of the western half of the state so far this winter. That's where our main livestock region is. So this may be a real shock to them coming in here. Here's precipitation. Again, we've done pretty well across southeast Nebraska here late, but very minimal to almost no precipitation has been falling here across western Nebraska. Kind of the same story with snowfall this winter. Only area that's really had any average snowfall is here across the far northeast corner. The soil moisture is abysmal. High plains getting down here to southern high plains, including a lot of the winter wheat belt. Potentially T has been off the charts here across western Nebraska, across the Front Range region so far this winter. And soil temperatures right now mostly in the mid-30s across the state. And here's the temperature and precipitation round for the week ending January 10th, 2026. Back to you, Bryce.
All right, thanks for that update, Eric. We'll be sure to dress for that forecast. Finally today, from seed catalogs to sales meetings, biostimulants are often marketed as a simple add-on to boost soybean yields. But a massive on-farm study across 22 states, including Nebraska, found that these seed treatments often fail to provide consistent results. Steve White spoke with a University of Nebraska researcher about what those findings mean for growers making decisions this spring.
How effective are biostimulants used in soybeans? There's a lot of talk about that. Nicholas Cafaro-Lamensa, you've done a research project. This is what you set out with a number of researchers from across multiple states, land-grant universities, a big project at many locations to see what was kind of the question you were hoping to answer.
Well, thank you, Steve. Yeah, well, the idea was to understand if those biostimulants basically work and kind of boost the yields, hoping to understand that probably not everywhere it's going to work, but in some places it may work, and understand what conditions and in which cases, you may get a good return in investment. That was kind of the general question we had.
Can you explain why are biostimulant, especially like the seed treatments and this kind of thing, why is that such a hot topic in soybeans right now?
The claims of the biostimulants is that they will probably increase the vigor of the seed or increase the nitrogen fixation and or the health of the plant, or combat some of the pathogens in the soils that will generate a better plant and generates a boost on the growth and on the yield. So it's and it's something that is not a synthetic fertilizer. So I guess that's the part where sometimes people get excited that it's something more biological and not necessarily synthetic.
If we could do things biologically, there's interest in that, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in terms of the study, how it was designed and carried out, as I read the report, this was in many states and many locations. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So these many states, basically, we work together in a group of soybean specialists across the U.S. that is called Science for Success, and we are basically all cropping system of soybean specialists across different land-grant universities across the state, and this study was across 22 universities. And what it has done is there was a survey to different farmers to understand what biological products they were more interested or using it, and from the ones that we actually could have the companies to provide those products. Basically, we gathered a list of 9 products, and we have a 10 treatment that was a control, and that's how we conducted across all the different 22 states for 2 years, and it was in field conditions realistic to what a farmer will do.
So given all of that, were you expecting some of these projects to work, at least in certain regions, or under certain conditions then?
Yeah, well, the idea was we were expecting that probably some of the products will potentially work in some conditions. And actually the idea was, well, if we have a broad testing across the states, we will probably characterize those conditions, and that will guide farmers to say, well, if I am in those conditions, maybe I can use this biological product, increase the yields, and actually not rely much on synthetic fertilizer in some cases. But what we found finally is that it didn't work. At least all those 10 products, it was not significant across the board, and that was something a bit surprising. But on those 10 products that we tested, we didn't find any significant difference in yield.
Given what you have now found, biologicals, and we'll put those in kind of one category, maybe not as effective as some practices. Maybe we should be thinking more about things like seed population and row spacing and even planting dates, planting soybeans. If we really want to make a difference that's going to affect the bottom line this year, maybe should we be thinking about some of those things?
Well, that's really the thing. Yeah, we tested these biological products across 22 states, and we didn't find a significant response across the board on those products. All those products, they were tested in furrow as a seed treatment, just to be clear, so not necessarily foliar. And across all those places, and there are other practices that were showing, higher yield, but not necessarily the response to the biostimulant. And obviously across most of the states, trying to organize to get planted early, it's something of the things that will boost the yields, and that's also already tested, in many research, and in many cases, at least in fields that irrigated fields, for example, in Nebraska, with not necessarily many issues on soil pH, I would say, the population can be even reduced and probably, get some more profit on that sense.
And we should point out there was one kind of exception, one product that actually did maybe seem to show some benefits.
Oh yeah, that's true. So there is one product, actually a couple of treatments that included the bradyrhizobium, which is the most common bacteria that we use for inoculation for the nitrogen fixation. So those were the ones that probably stick a bit out, which is something well-known research that especially in places where there is no soybean for long term, there is more possibility to respond to those inoculants as well. But yeah, we were all very surprised that actually several of the products, didn't work anywhere.
So I guess if you had a message to soybean growers this year, as they're looking at all the things, their management decisions they need to make, maybe what should they keep in mind about biostimulants as they are making some management decisions here?
Well, I would say that first, based on these studies, it's very unlikely that you're gonna get probably a return on investment at least in the majority that we tested. I will look for probably some local information to see if they really work, or maybe do some on-farm, some strips in your field. Today the technology allows to test yourself in the field and then get comfortable if that product, gets you what you expect for, and then move forward to that. But maybe instead of looking at biological products, I would say first look at the management practices that you can accommodate, like planting date, plant population, maybe utilizing a fungicide in some situations when you have disease pressure, and in other cases, if you have the capabilities, maybe row spacing could play a role as well.
All right, thank you very much for that story, Steve. Now, heads up to you, if you'd like to dig deeper into this topic or other on-farm research projects, we encourage you to visit the website onfarmresearch.unl.edu. There you'll find results, project ideas, and tools to get involved in on-farm research in Nebraska. Well, folks, that's going to wrap up this week's edition of Market Journal. If you missed one of our stories, you can catch up anytime on YouTube or follow the team on social media. We look forward to seeing you right back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce Tuskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.